Well, let's go now to the Conservative MP Michael Fabricant, who says the only people who will have attended the party are people working closely together inside Downing Street at the time. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. So you've put out a tweet saying that there is this justification, I think, in your view. Tell us more about how you see it.
Well, I don't know about justification. I'm trying to actually give an explanation about how the mindset could have even allowed this to happen. You know, people don't always understand precisely what Downing Street is like. There are over 100 offices. It's 3 buildings knocked into one. It's connected to the Whitehall building, the Cabinet Office, 70 Whitehall, and there is an enclosed garden. And all of it, obviously, is a very, very secure area. I know a lot of these people at that time were working 18-hour days to deliver, actually, one of the best, if not the best, vaccine program in the world. They were exhausted. Now, if Boris Johnson has got a failing, one of those failings is loyalty to his friends and loyalty to his staff. And whether it was right or not legally is something the Metropolitan Police and Sue Gray will decide. But I just wanted to make it clear.
I want to just come in then, because, I mean, you've obviously wanted to contextualise it for how you see it, how you say things were inside number 10. The context for people out there in the country who have made sacrifices through that first lockdown, in particular through the whole period of the pandemic, will be missed funerals, not being able to hold loved ones' hands as they were dying, not being able to visit their loved ones in care homes. The rules were made by those in number 10, and what they see is one rule for us, another for them. Do you understand how deeply that is cutting for people?
In fact, my best friend, his mother died in the most tragic circumstances from COVID in Birmingham in February of last year. So of course I understand, and I understand the anger too. I'm not detached from it. But look, the difference with funerals, marriage ceremonies and all the rest of it is that you're meeting outsiders. This wasn't involving any outsiders. This was in a secure area. So the people who had been on top of each other, as it were, in these small pokey offices in numbers 10, 11 and 12 Downing Street, some of them then met in the garden. So there was no chance.
The rules though, I mean,
the rules, you're right about the rules, but, you know, that, as I say, is not something I'm actually here to discuss now.
But why not? Sorry to interrupt you,
but for people to understand. Sorry, just let me finish, and then I'll certainly, you know, it's for people to understand the circumstances in which this arose. People working long hours, and don't forget that Boris too, among many other people, had caught COVID in number 10 Downing Street. The garden is an extension of their workplace and a secure area, and there was no mixing with outside people.
The rules didn't allow for mitigation, justification, explanation. Police were moving people off of park benches. People were getting fined for breaches of the rules. The rules were there for everybody, and they were being made in number 10.
Yes, of course, the workers in number 10 were key workers. They were designated as such. And you're absolutely right.
But sorry to come in again at that point, because
but particularly there was strict. I remember, for example, in Derbyshire, you had a couple walking in the Peak District, and a drone caught them, and they were prosecuted. So yes, the rules were clear in those circumstances.
No, but the rules did not say if you're a key worker, you're exempt.
That the Metropolitan Police and Sue Gray will decide.
The rules didn't say if you're a key worker, you're exempt from the rules that apply in any other context. Key workers had to go to their place of work. They were also expected to go home at the end of the whatever shift that they had done, whether it was in a hospital, a long, grueling shift in a hospital, or cleaning bins, working in a supermarket, all of those jobs that continued to keep the country going.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you say, and of course I sympathise with what you say. I mean, there is an argument, I'm not presenting it necessarily myself, that the garden is an integral part of the office. I mean, the doors open out into that garden, all of which is a secure area. Look, from the rules point of view, that's going to be decided by Sue Gray and the Metropolitan Police, and we'll have to see what happens. What I'm trying to explain is that Boris and others felt sorry for people who are working long, long hours, and they were simply spilling out from their own offices into a secure garden, which is an integral part of number 10 Downing Street. And you know what? I'd rather have a prime minister who felt for his staff and all those hard-working people than some cold fish who really couldn't care a toss about.
Can it be described accurately, though, as spilling out when an email was sent to 100 or so people inviting them to a planned event? Tables were put out, food was put out on those tables. That's not a sort of off-the-cuff spilling out, is it?
No, but you spill out from your offices into the secure area. There was no mixing. This is the point I'm making. So many people, you know, who were prosecuted and felt they were breaking the rules was because there was the risk of them mixing with other people whom they wouldn't have otherwise met. These were the same people who had actually worked in tight offices where, of course, the risk of contagion, as we know from Boris's own infection, the risk of contagion was far higher, in fact, far less so in an open space like the garden. It is, I think the whole point, perhaps, that will be looked at by Sue Gray and the Metropolitan Police is, was that garden, you know, which is a walled garden with armed police patrolling outside, was that garden an integral part of the office space? Clearly, that was the view taken by some people who decided to get involved in that.
Should we have to wait for Sue Gray to tell us whether or not the Prime Minister was there?
I beg your pardon? Sorry.
Should we have to wait for Sue Gray to tell us whether or not the Prime Minister was there?
Well, presumably, or the Met Police, yes. Or maybe this afternoon, as Nick Eardley correctly reported, there's going to be an urgent question. Maybe it'll be revealed then, but I don't know. I'm not part of the number 10 team.
It's been pointed out by many, amongst them Ruth Davidson, the former leader of the Scottish Conservatives, this morning, that he knows if he was there. Why doesn't he just say so?
Well, you have to ask the Prime Minister that. I can't speak for him.
But do you think he should?
Because the circumstances by which some people might have felt that it was actually quite lawful to go from these confined offices into a confined garden. This wasn't going into a public park where others could have mixed with them. And that will be the argument, I'm sure, the Metropolitan Police and Sue Gray will be considering.
A quote from Ruth Davidson: "I cannot conceive of how this ever happened and how it seems to have happened multiple times, and no one pointed out," telling people at the time that people couldn't visit relatives in hospitals, they couldn't visit loved ones in care homes, they couldn't attend funerals.
Well, I don't know
there's
how
absolutely
long...
no mitigation, no defence.
Yeah, I don't know to what degree, how many times Ruth Davidson has been to number 10 and how familiar she is with number 10. I think she's been at least once because I've met her there. But she will know this is very different from going into a public area. I think, if they'd gone into a public area where they could be mixing with outsiders and therefore risking contagion, that would have been extremely serious indeed and a resigning matter. But this wasn't a public area. These were the same people who had been working together indoors, now going into a confined area outdoors, and therefore there was no mixing or contagion involved.
How do you know? Sorry to interrupt you.
Coming back to me on the points of law, but that's the very thing that the Metropolitan Police and Sue Gray will be considering.
How do you know who was invited and how this party actually, or how this gathering was conducted in the garden?
There were people within the Downing Street and Cabinet Office complex.
And how do you know that?
It's been very, very widely reported, and ITV, I believe, have the email with the list of all the people who were invited. I think you should invite ITV on.
that list hasn't been published. In terms of your conviction that these were people working in offices together and they wouldn't have been mixing, how can you be so sure of that? I mean, because in order, if what you're saying is, they were working in groups in offices, anybody working in an environment at that time had to do so in a socially distanced way.
Joan, you raise a very good point there, a very good point. I think if it turned out, and there is absolutely no evidence to suggest that this is the case, but if it were to turn out that other people were invited who weren't within the 10 9, 10, 11, 12 Downing Street and 70 Whitehall area where they are working all together, and it is in effect one building with connecting corridors and they're constant mixing. If that would be very, very serious indeed, but there's absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. It's a group of people who have been working together in the one building. And therefore, as I say, I keep emphasizing it. I don't want to be boring about this, but there was no mixing. So the contagion couldn't spread. And as I say, if Boris has a fault, it's because he actually cares for the people who work for him in number 10 Downing Street. And I can see how this issue arose.
But I mean, even if you were outside, the rules at the time were really clear. You couldn't congregate. You could be one other person from one other household outdoors, whatever the context, and people weren't allowed to hang out in bigger groups in gardens.
Well, Joanna, as I keep saying to you, you're asking me the same question. Mm-hmm. This is the very thing that the Metropolitan Police and Sue Gray, and just to remind viewers that Sue Gray is the Cabinet Office, very senior Cabinet Office official who has been put in charge of the investigation internally. And of course, it has been a mess because the permanent private secretary attended one of these parties because he originally was going to be doing that investigation. It's for them to decide, including the Metropolitan Police and maybe the Crown Prosecution Service, whether an offence had been committed. But because it was a secure area, because you couldn't get people walking in off the street into that garden, into that whole complex, the perception, certainly within Downing Street, was that this is part of the office complex. Therefore, there was no mixing. They weren't putting lives at risk. And of course, as I say, just to remind, I mean, for example, this friend of mine whose mother was dying in hospital, I mean, one of the reasons why he couldn't visit her, and in fact, he was saying to me only on Sunday, it's 1 year to the day that he last saw his mother going into hospital in an ambulance. And that was the last time he saw her. But the rules for that were very, very clear, that they didn't want to see mixing and cross-contagion. This wouldn't have happened in this instance in Downing Street.
Michael Fabricant, thank you very much for joining us.